In understanding the role of the mech warrior, the pilot, in BattleTech, the first thing we focus on is the gunnery skill. Literally, that base number that you need to calculate, adding on modifiers of movement, terrain, range, to figure out what you need to hit. And for many of us, this is the constant variable that you're going to use in BattleTech. But there are two other skills, there are two other potential roles that you're going to have to make from time to time. And I wanted to push out a couple of ideas, not only in understanding them, but understanding when they need to be played, when they need to be checked. So hopefully, as a mech warrior, you can avoid them and ideally manipulate, set up the situation with those tactics to force your opponent to take these. And we're going to look at making pilot checks, pilot skill rolls, and consciousness checks for your mech warrior. So the idea behind a pilot skill is there are certain situations in the rules, whether you're playing, essentially we have three types of rules in BattleTech, and think of them as rules building on each other. The great thing about BattleTech is that you can play the introductory rules that are very, very simple, a great way to jump in. Then there's kind of the classic BattleTech rules that we see in the Game of Armored Combat. And then there are rules in the Total Warfare book, which is this big tome, which adds on more layers. Not necessary, but it adds a little bit more tactical nuances to the game. We're going to look at cases across the entire spectrum. So some of these roles you might not have to make, depending on the rule set that you're utilizing. The idea behind making a pilot skill roll depends on something extraordinary has happened to your mech. And now literally to try and do something, to try and stand up, to try and not fall down, you have to make this roll. And much like the gunnery skill, there's going to be modifiers based on it. You're going to start with that base number and then add or subtract. So a couple of examples. The first is the damage that you take. These mechs can take massive amounts of damage. But when you take more than 20 points in the Total Warfare rules, you have to make a pilot check to see if you get knocked down. I mean, think of all the missiles and PPCs slamming into your mech. The kinetic force is crazy. And yes, you've got the gyro struggling to keep things up, but think of the narrative. You're moving around, the mech is moving, it's very dynamic. You take a lot of damage, can you keep that mech up? So after taking that damage in the shooting phase, you would then make these checks. And if you fail, then you fall down. And then we look at facing, or depending on elevation, if there's going to be some damage that you take. When your mech falls, in order to get up, you have to make this pilot skill roll to see if you can physically get up and keep moving again. And again, there's modifiers where it comes into play. Another check would be when you kick. So this idea, a mech kick just isn't this like gentle nudge. I imagine like you're winding up and you're going to kick. And if you've ever been kicked by a Stalker or a Thunderbolt, or you've kicked piloting a Stalker or a T-Bolt, 100 tons, 80 tons, 90 tons, that's a massive amount of kinetic damage that transfers. The target, the mech, unless it's a building, it's not going to be standing there. That represents the skill. So you roll, and if you miss, there's a chance that you will fall down. There's some other examples of skidding. This idea in a city, on a city street, if you're moving and you move too fast and you suddenly bank, there are times with vehicles also you'll have to make these skill rolls to see where you skid and where you move. If you move through certain types of terrain, depending on the rule set, this represents the physical dexterity of your mech. So an interesting and a very, very important skill. And usually by the time you potentially realize it, it's when you get into trouble. An example from a battle a little while ago, I had my Atlas, Inner Sphere Atlas, kind of holding its ground. It was a cash and grab mission. We got the goods. We were on the way out, and mechs were, of course, in pursuit, hot pursuit. So I let the Atlas stay behind about 8 or so hexes in a delaying action, and it was essentially backpedaling off the board. And I was confident, one, you're not going to want to get close to an Atlas because I've got that AC-20, I've got the fists to duke it out, and I hadn't taken much damage. It was pretty fresh with the damage. So I was confident I could backpedal out. I'm surrounded by literally by like 4 or 5 mechs. Took a lot of damage. Tried to kick because it was right there. Missed. Fell. Failed the pilot check. Fell. Okay, next turn. Go to get up. Fail the check. Well, now I'm still prone. Now the opposing mechs, they get even closer. They're like, I'm running up to point blank. So I'm like, okay, next turn. Try to get up. Fail. Promptly get a new set of dice. Now I'm getting stomped on by everybody. I'm getting kicked. I'm just getting savaged down there, point blank, weapons. Try to get up again. Fail. Eventually I did get up, and I got out of there missing like an arm and a bunch of other stuff. We were not playing in a campaign, but honestly, if it was, I lost that exchange. I won the mission, but I lost the mission. Because in the narrative, if it was a campaign, yeah, I got the goods, but the amount of damage that Atlas took, I would have spent all the C-bills repairing it. And I would have had to repair it because it was a key point in my lance. So the question is, you need to be careful. Do you really want to kick when you're surrounded? It could happen. You know, anytime you roll dice, it could roll poorly. So when do you make those checks? That's what they are. When you make them depends very much on the rule set you're using. The introductory rules in the intro box, Game of Armored Combat, full rules of BattleTech, and I think that's what most of us play. And then the Total Warfare, which brings in an entirely new element to play.